Welcome to Night Talks, the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications talk show produced by students for you. I'm Zaki Thalji, a first year studying media production management and technology, and our guest today is Jess Jiang, a producer with National Public Radio in New York for over 10 years. She currently serves as senior supervising editor for NPR's Planet Money program. Hi Jess, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you've been working in broadcasting for over a decade now. Did you always aspire to work in radio and share stories with audiences?
That is a funny story. No, I had not planned to work in radio, actually. In college, I had studied economics just because it was easy, but then I had also planned on being an environmental lawyer. And so I had taken environmental studies classes, I had prepped for the LSATs, I did all of that. But after graduating, I was like, okay, before you spend another 3 years in school, let's just see what it's like being an environmental lawyer. And so I worked at this environmental law center for a little bit. And the work was very important. I enjoyed doing that part of the work. The everyday of the work was not enjoyable. It was kind of, it was a bit terrible. And so then I really thought about, okay, what did you enjoy in college? Like what makes sense to do as a job? Like what would you enjoy doing day to day? And I thought about this podcast that I made with a friend. And so then I was like, okay, we're gonna try doing this. And so I got an internship and sort of that took off from there. I mentioned I majored in economics, and I think that did help me a lot in that period because I graduated during the financial crisis. And this was a time when people really wanted to understand the economy, and there weren't a lot of people who could explain it. And so I both had a podcasting background and I had this economics degree, and I think that made me a particularly good candidate for a lot of jobs back then, yeah.
So in 2010, you began working as an intern at WNYC Radio, a public radio station out of New York. What inspired you to transition to broadcast, and how did you kind of get your foot in the door?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I had a bit of podcasting background, and so that was quite helpful. But really, I worked on a show that I really liked called Studio 360. It doesn't exist anymore, but I was actually a fan of the show, and I think that really is helpful because you can talk about the show, what you want to add to it, what you want to change, but also what you like. And I think that was probably pretty helpful in how it was a very competitive internship application process, and so I think that really helped me in that giant pool of students for sure.
So you then made the switch to NPR, taking a production assistant job. You held that role for about 3.5 years. What does a production assistant's day-to-day look like, and what types of shows and projects did you create?
Well, I think at the time when I started at NPR at Planet Money, we were doing 3 shows a week. And so it's going to be really tough for me to remember exactly what shows that I worked on back then. But it was sort of anything. I would help with interview prep. I would help with doing research. I remember sometimes people would be like, I wonder if we could do an episode on the resource curse, right? Which is this idea that oil-rich countries actually, their economy can sometimes suffer because of that influx of money is only going to a certain part of the population. And so I remember trying to find different examples, different countries that did something different where they might have been able to escape the resource curse. So it was sort of anything and everything under the sun was sort of part of the job, which was really exciting for especially someone young in the industry because it just meant I could touch a lot of things and learn from a lot of people. And at the time, the show had so many people to learn from, and so it was a really great experience for a very new producer.
So after 3.5 years as an assistant, you became a producer for NPR's Planet Money. How is this role different from what you had been previously doing? And was there a learning curve or any challenges that came along with the new role?
Honestly, it's a lot of the same. It was a higher salary and a better title, but it was essentially doing the same work. I think the one difference is I was asked to lead more projects, right, which is definitely more ambitious work, and play a role in either planning them, scheduling them, figuring out deadlines, and all sorts of things. So it's sort of like much of the same, but more in terms of actual work.
Yeah, that's great. So one of the projects you actually led, the T-shirt project, you ended up winning an Emmy, which is great. Can you explain the concept and how that story kind of came together?
Yeah, I should correct you. I didn't lead it, but
sorry.
I was part of a
Okay.
team that worked on it for sure. And so in terms of like actually the work on it was such a team effort. Like, for example, we normally did not work with visuals people, and that whole project really required multimedia experiences, right? And so we worked a lot with videographers, and so we split up into different teams, right, that took on different parts of the T-shirt manufacturing process. And so I was part of the earlier group, and it was me and host Robert Smith we covered the going to the cotton fields, going to Indonesia where the cotton is turned into yarn, and that yarn is then turned into the fabric that makes the T-shirt. And it was really important to us. A couple of things were really important to us. First of all, that it was a global journey, right? Because I think most of the clothes we wear is part of the global economy, and really seeing and tracing what that supply chain looks like was a key part of, for us, the reporting of it. And then, like I said, the really working with other teams, like we worked with a videographer named David Gilkey, and he went to Indonesia with us, and that story would have been very different without him, without those visuals of what it looks like to make the yarn that makes your T-shirt.
Winning an Emmy, that's great. That's a big deal. How did you guys get the idea to work on it?
Yeah, there's this an economist named Pietro Rivoli who wrote an entire book about the making of a T-shirt and the kind of global economy that takes to make a T-shirt. It's this beautiful book. People should read it. It was really the inspiration for the whole T-shirt project. And so Adam Davidson and Alex Bloomberg had talked about following some of that. And I think it really became much bigger than we even thought it could, because in order to do the work, we had the idea of selling the T-shirt that we were gonna make. And so we started a Kickstarter for it. This was, I think, fairly new, like a new idea in journalism that you could even do this. And it garnered a lot of attention. A lot of fans bought T-shirts. And so I think it's fair to say we got a bit more money than we thought we would. And so that really allowed us to blow out the project and make it as ambitious as we could make it.
So do you remember the exact moment when you received word that you won the Emmy? Was it exciting? How did the team feel?
I think it was exciting. It was very strange because I think it was one of the early Emmys in news and information. And so I didn't even know that was a thing. And it was just all very odd. I'm not really in it for awards, and so I don't really seek them out. And so, yeah, it was just a little bizarre. But yes, it was definitely an honor.
Yeah, so kind of transitioning. One of the programs that NPR is known for is their Rough Translation podcast. Tell us about that series and the types of stories you're able to produce.
Yeah, so Rough Translation was NPR's international podcast. I was the founding producer of it. I worked closely with Gregory Warner, and initially Gregory Warner, who was the host of the series. And in addition to that, we worked with an editor, Marion McCune, at the start of it. And it was a very different kind of storytelling than I had done, because Planet Money is very you have a story, you have a narrative, there's some economic learning that you're doing. The stories for Rough Translation were very personal. And so that was an experience for me trying to figure out how do I do that kind of storytelling. Sometimes they're emotional. I had to figure out how I felt about crying in front of a source and whether that felt journalistically appropriate. So it was sort of kind of a real learning journey for me working on that show.
Yeah, so what does it mean to be involved in the creation of such emotional and impactful stories?
Yeah, I think so. On one front, we had to figure out what did the show even sound like? What did we want it to sound like? What was the kind of style, aesthetic we were going for? How we even do the reporting? So there was sort of that level of things. And then in terms of like the actual finding stories, getting people to talk with you and share such personal things, I think it was a real honor that people were willing to go there and tell and be so vulnerable with me, with us, and trying to find a way to share those stories in a respectful way, but still having a particular take or a particular way of viewing their stories, right? And so I think that's what I mean by a real learning curve, because that was such a like experience to try and work through as we were actually making the thing.
Is there a story that had you kind of considering the ethical questions that come along with showing a story where it's very emotional?
Yeah, I think one story that particularly comes to mind is I worked on an episode as part of the Homefront series for Rough Translation that was about a veteran who was a triple amputee. He was involved in an IED bombing in Iraq, and it led him to lose 3 of his 4 limbs. And so he had such a vulnerable story to tell, and we went to visit him to really get to the root of his story. And in the process of visiting him, I was talking with his wife for an interview, and she shared some very surprising details of the domestic violence that she had faced with her husband. And that was a moment where the story took a very different turn from the story that we were planning on telling. And so I think it was both, there were 2 challenges. One was in the moment, how do I elicit more information and ask questions in a respectful but sometimes probing way, right? So there's that front. And in order to do that, I just do it with empathy. It is something that I'm maybe more experienced with, but just like really caring about someone's story, it shows, right? And people then want to share more. I also tell people that if I'm ever asking something too personal, they always have a chance to say no. And I think that's really important, especially with people who aren't government officials or aren't sort of media savvy, right? Like that they don't know they have that power in a conversation, in an interview. So that was one front. And then on the other front, the other challenge was, how do I tell this story that isn't gratuitous, that has meaning, right? And sort of understands her story and her experience when she was still puzzling through it, right? Like she didn't understand what it all meant, which I think is fair, because like sometimes you just don't understand like your story while you're living it. And so it was a really challenging story to tell, but I'm really happy with how we told it in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a great perspective to have. So you currently work as the senior supervising editor of Planet Money. What exactly does a senior supervising editor do, and how do you make an impact on the final product that we hear?
Yeah, so I can sort of break that apart. Supervising just means that I have direct reports and I'm a manager. So that's simple. And then as an editor, I work more with hosts and producers on how to tell a story. So sort of almost being like the mentor to my former self, right? And so in that way, it's a lot about talking about story ideas and honing in on them and thinking, okay, what's the best way to tell that story? Like, is there a scene that really illustrates it? Is there some way that makes something feel more palpable to a listener and almost more visual to a listener? And so that's often what we're thinking about is like how to tell the story and then also who to talk with, right? Like who are the voices going to be for this story? So that's a lot of the conversations that I have with hosts and reporters and producers of like, what is the way that this story is going to unfold?
So how collaborative is the production process? What are the biggest challenges to creating a great story?
Yeah, it is a very collaborative process, at least the way we do it at Planet Money for sure, which just means like we are in a lot of conversation about how to tell the story. We're often working together, like it's almost like people have different roles in different parts of the story. So it's, I think sometimes in initial stages, it's very much me as an editor, and there actually are multiple editors, so I'm not the only editor on the team, but we are talking with the hosts and reporters, or if the producers are reporting a piece, we're talking with them initially. And then the reporters and producers go off and like book their guests and maybe even do the interviews. And then we plan around what they've gotten. So sometimes we envision one thing initially of like, this is how the story is going to unfold. And then in the process of reporting or in the process of doing the interview, the story changes or the plan should change, right? And so then we talk after and think, okay, is this the story we had envisioned or is it somewhat different? And then from there, usually the reporter or producer creates a draft, and then about a week and a half before the show will air, we start the actual production week on the episode, where we go through multiple edits and try and figure out, okay, how can we sharpen the material that we have to tell the best story that we can tell?
Although Planet Money stories relate to economics, they still cover a wide range of topics. How do you tailor your content to resonate with your audiences? And how do you keep each story feeling unique while maintaining a consistency across the series?
Yeah. So we're a pretty big team. I think it's like now 18 people or so. And so we have these really engaging and engaged pitch meetings where we talk about what is relevant, right? Like, what are people interested in? What are we interested in? What we get a sense like our friends might be interested in. And that really drives some of our storytelling, is thinking about what is the kind of news ideas that there might be a Planet Money angle on, right? That we can say something a bit interesting, a bit surprising, a bit just something else that we haven't heard before. And so that drives a lot of what we choose to make. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So did Planet Money start a record label? What's the story there?
So we did start a record label, though we only put out one song, to be clear. I don't think we'd ever do it again because I think our legal team would not be very happy with us. They always think we are like the things we asked to do are just some of the most ridiculous things. We asked to buy, I think, $10,000 worth of oil at one point. They just sometimes just have to chuckle with the things that we are trying to do. And so with the record label, what basically had happened was someone sent us a song that hadn't been published, that hadn't really seen the light of day. And so they thought like might be an opportunity for us, and we listened to the song, and it's called Inflation Song, and it's all about inflation, and it's actually a song from the 1970s. Wow. So yeah, exactly. So a 50-year-old song seemed like it would have a lot of resonance today. So we did this project about 2 years ago when inflation was much more extreme than it is now, and so it was basically a chance maybe to publish this song. And so we had to figure out how to make a record deal and basically bring the band members together to figure out how they were going to split the royalties for this. It was just things we had never thought we could do. We had to figure out how to do. So yes, I would say we're a record label with an asterisk, just meaning that we will never put out another song like this is the only song we will ever do.
Yeah, you had to try it once, though.
Yeah, exactly.
So your visit to the University of Florida relates to AI and virtual reality. How are these technologies transforming business right now, and what impact might they have in the near future?
That is, I think, the million-dollar question now, or maybe it's the billion-dollar question if we have to include inflation. I think basically we don't know yet, which I know is sort of a terrifying answer, especially for a lot of students who are about to go out into the job market or are figuring out what they want to do with their careers. So I think when I based on the economic research that I've read, that the podcast that we've made, I think there's essentially like two visions for what lays ahead, and this is a pivotal moment where we can define maybe which path we go down. So one path is that we could potentially like create this technological change that will really replace jobs, that it would be kind of a terrible moment for the economy, that will be like, oh, we had a chance to prevent this and we didn't take it. So I think that's one potential path. And I think we can look to history for moments that were like this, right? Like I think in some ways, the Industrial Revolution really changed the work of artisans, right? It took away the jobs of people who worked looms, or people who worked, who made textiles in like a homemade way and made it a factory job, right? And so I think that changed the lives of many people in one direction, but then also over time, factory work became more skilled. And so that's one direction it could go in. And then another direction is where it's more like the technology could be a tool that really helps work and eases work. Like, I think an example could be like, you probably have never called a travel agent before, right? Like yeah. That is like, we have the internet to do that. You have computers that sort of help you buy a flight without ever talking to a person. That has made, in some ways, your life a lot better. It did take away travel agent jobs, but maybe those people were able to find work in a similar field or a slightly different field. Maybe it's more customer service. But it's all ways in which we can think about, like, is technological advancement going to be a complement to work, or is it going to replace work? And so I do think in some ways, government intervention, what institutions do, what like higher education does with this new technology is really gonna define which path we go on, or maybe it's gonna be somewhere in the middle. So we'll see.
So you're on campus for about a week, one of the longer trips that you've taken to a university. Do you plan on visiting more colleges and talking to students?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting time, especially in journalism, to talk with students. I've done it sometimes, and I think right now the particular moment has to do with journalism and where journalism is going, and especially audio journalism. I'd be remiss to not talk about the departments, the parts of big organizations that have really shut down the long form audio journalism groups within a company. So it can feel like a scary time to want to become a journalist. And I want to talk with students in part because when I was graduating, like I mentioned before, I graduated into the housing crisis, right? That was also a particularly scary and weird time to be looking for a job. And I think my story, I know, is particular, right? It's not the path that just anyone can take. But I also think it's a reminder that you can try different things. You can, you don't have to know everything when you graduate from college. You won't know everything when you graduate from college. And so really allowing different opportunities, different paths to present itself to you and to take them is important. So yeah, I think I like talking to students because I want to set their minds at ease a little bit, that they don't have to know exactly what their life plan is going to be from as soon as they graduate.
So to kind of wrap things up, with media and specifically podcasting so quickly evolving, what advice would you give people looking to pursue a career in radio or podcasting today?
Yeah, like I said, I think the first thing is to be open to different things, that it might not, what happens in the end might not be the thing that you planned out or set out to do. I think the second thing is advice that I often give younger people, and it's a weird one, which is to really be choosy and to work on things that you have passion and enjoy doing, because it shows. Like, I know early on when I worked on Studio 360, which is this arts and culture show, it was really important for me to like work late, to really hustle and like make the episodes that I thought I could, that I like wanted to make, that I thought wasn't really happening on the show. And I don't think I would have been able to do that if I didn't like the show, or like I just didn't think it was worth it. And so I often tell younger people to be choosy and to work on things that they actually want to make, because it really makes a difference.
Thanks for coming on the show, Jess. We really had a great time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and thanks to all our viewers out there tonight. We hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time, good night.